He rises bloodless from dust, with dead eyes that are pits. Twin reaches to eternal pain. He is the lodestone to the gathering clan, made anew and dream-racked. The standard a rotted hide, the throne a bone cage, the king a ghost from dark fields of battle. And now the horn moans on this gray-clad dawn, drawing the disparate host to war, in the charging frenzy of unbidden memories of ice.
What up, and welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. We're doing Memories of Ice again. Let's catch up on some chapters. This one is chapter 5. Let's get into it. So I've had work issues, been doing collabs, contests, giveaways, tournaments, all kinds of stuff, but I'm ready to start chipping some chapters, get MOI polished off so we can get on to House of Chains and, more importantly, Midnight Tides. This episode is going to be like all the other chapter stuff, where we're going to go into the summary review, whatever, then the spoilery goodness, and I'll give you the clear line on when to jump out. Apologies in advance because my computer that I usually use to record the audio on is down, so we're going straight out of the camera audio. I hope it's not terrible because this is a dope chapter. We kick off the whole chapter with Lady Envy and her whole like ragtag caravan of like bruisers and brawlers and puppies and whatever. There's a lot of really cool interactions between Talk and Lady Envy, and she specifically is like vibing with him pretty much and is like trying to convince him like, dude, you're the man, you're a badass, whatever, and he just like cannot take a compliment. And there's this really cool dynamic between Talk and Lady Envy because he's super like either suspicious of magic, he doesn't trust magic. You know, he's got a lot of trepidation about being around people that can use magic. And then here's Lady Envy, who's like this badass mage who can like do all this gnarly stuff. And she's like, oh, that's stupid. But basically what it boils down to is that Talk is like all superstitious of her. And she's like, why are you superstitious? And he ends up spilling the beans on like all the dirt that he thinks he knows about her, and how he knows that her Animander Rake, someone named Osirk, and the Queen of Dreams Triss used to be like traveling companions. After Triss bails, then the three of them chill together. It's Rake, Osirk, Envy. Eventually Osirk bails out, Osric, and it's just Rake and Envy for a very long time. Then at the chaining of the chained god, that's when their partnership or whatever ends, because Rake is part of the contingent that made that happen or was like on board with that. She didn't want to participate, and so they went their separate ways.
I hate it. I'm out.
There's all the stuff with the Segula in the background and what they're doing there and all that. And Tool kind of like educates because he's a fighter, right? So he's like telling him how it works with the nonverbal communication, the hand gestures, the like head tilting, the stances, the nods, and all that stuff. And Talk's like, oh my gosh, there's like this whole language going on. He's like, if that's true, how come I haven't like already been killed? And Tool's like, that's because they know you're a punk and they know they just beat your ass.
That's cold-blooded.
But Talk basically tells Tool, right, like, look, you got to be the one to find out why these Segula are here, because they don't, you know, interact with people that they see as a lower rank. And as you just told me, that's obviously where I stack up, but you already beat Senu's ass, so go ahead and ask him. And he straight up does. He walks over and he's like, yo, why are you guys here? And then Senu actually tells him, he's like, dude, we're here because we're the punitive army of the Segula. We're here to, like, punish this Panty Domino for continuing to send all these priests priests to our island. They're like constantly trying to recruit us into the Pantheon, and we want these dudes to leave us alone. So we're here to just straight up put in work and make them think twice about doing their evangelizing, shall we say, on the Segula Island. And what's dope about it too is like the reason why, right, that they're like, want them to stop. It isn't because like it's a real threat from the Panty Domino, but what happens is they're Agadi they can't send against them because those are like the noble warriors, and so the priests come, they can't fight or whatever, and so they have to send all these like low-level initiates out, and they just have to keep like slaughtering all these priests that just keep it coming and coming, and so there's no threat of like being overrun or anything like that. But the problem is it's killing morale because they're having to have their like lowest level, people are trying to get up in the Segula mix, do all this like extermination of these priests that just keep coming, and so they're like getting all downtrodden, and it's like ruining the company morale. So it just goes to show you how badass those Segula are, and apparently the message is like not getting through to the Panty and Domino because they just keep sending more and more and more and aren't stopping.
Go away.
But the whole backstory with the Segula too is so funny, right? Because then the Panty and Domino says, "All right, we're at war. You keep killing our priests," and they go, "Oh, sweet, we're at war." So their like tradition is to send all these gifts, and it creates all this confusion. Like, oh, then you want to trade, and they, and so they're just not really getting to a consensus. But to me, maybe the craziest like bombshell of the whole entire thing is that we find out at the end of all this stuff that like Senu is actually just like a 14-year-old kid. He's not even like a full-blown Segula. He's just like straight up one of these little initiates, and he stepped up and like almost got the better of Tool right off the bat. So again, Segula, just geez, love those dudes. But from there, like almost immediately, a couple huge moments happen, right? First is that Thorul challenges Tool, or he doesn't even challenge him, he just straight up attacks, and they immediately start scrapping just kind of out of nowhere as he was like done talking to Senu. While they're fighting, we also get this whole like backstory of Animander Rake going to the Segula Island through Lady Envy, and she's talking about how he just shows up, waltzes in, he's not like showing deference, he doesn't know the culture, obviously he's totally clueless about the like whole body language stuff and all of that, and so all these Segula are just constantly attacking, and he's just like having to, kill more and more and more of them. Eventually, the Segula 7th comes out. He kills him or her, and he realizes like, dude, these people are just not gonna stop coming. And so he didn't really like get driven off, but he's just like, he was just there out of curiosity to check it out. And they just kept attacking, and so eventually he just like dips out through his warren, and Mock's like, yeah bro, that's the I forget what he says, he calls him like Dark Sword or something like that. He's like, he's the Segula 7th now, he needs to come take his mask and like take his place amongst the Agadi, and Envy's like, bruh, that's not gonna, good luck forcing him to do that.
That's never gonna happen, ever, 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 ever.
At this point, Tool comes back, and he's like dragging Thorul by the scruff of his neck, and he's obviously KO'd him or whatever. Mock tells Lady Envy like, yo, don't heal him, he got beat in a fight fair and square, that's on him. And she just straight up slaps the out of Mock, and she's like, yo, servants don't tell me what to do. Tool tells Talk what a like worthy opponent Thorul was, and like how long it's been since he faced somebody who could actually like go toe to toe with him. Then you see Mock like starting to get all pumped up, but as Tool's like sitting down, he's like, especially because I had to like beat him using just the flat of my blade, that made it especially hard. Mock was like, oh snap. Luckily Lady Envy like steps in and totally bails Mock out and is like, yo, we're not gonna have this nonsense like fighting or whatever. And so we go over to Pale and pick up with the Bridge Burners, and Whiskey Jack is basically wanting a debrief now after everything to find out what do they think's going on with Gonos. And so both Mallet and Quick Ben and everybody is like, something is seriously up. He's got some changes happening, and he's resisting him, and his resistance is like manifesting as this like sickness that he has, these fevers and gut issues, and all of that is a function of trying to like prevent this change. And they don't know anything about like the Silver Fox stuff that he told, or that she told Ganos about, like Master of the Deck or anything like that, but they just know something heavy is up, and his like resistance to it is basically the root of his shenanigans, and they agree to just kind of keep an eye on it, because what else can you really do? And then at the end of this meeting, you know, Quick Ben decides like, yo, I can't even like bring up this other stuff about like Burn and the Crippled God. He's like, the host already has like way too much stuff going on. He's like, I'm just gonna have to tackle that one on my own.
For your last 10 transactions, please press 1.
Like a wall.
We get Whiskey Jack and Dujek kind of having their little strategic meeting. Dujek is encouraging Whiskey Jack to have parents stay close to Tattersail, Silver Fox, whatever, because they reminisce about how terrible and frightening and whatever the Talon Imass are, and think of that in the hands of somebody like the former Emperor. Now imagine it in the hands of like a 12-year-old kid, a lot more unpredictable, and so it's better to have that as an ally, and potentially even the ability to kind of keep some bumpers on there than having to face off against that as an enemy. They talk about how, you know, Calor, this whole Calor Silver Fox dynamic is really going to be a sticking point for this whole kind of alliance that they have going on. But Dujek says, you know, look, don't worry about it, and goes through all this like history of what a badass Kaladin Brood is, and he's like, dude can handle his own people pretty much. And Whiskey Jack's like, all right, bro, but I'm just telling you, if it comes to it, he's like, I'm gonna throw down. And Dujek was like, even if I told you not to, he's like, bet, homie. He's like, this is straight up on principle. That's why we love Whiskey Jack.
Try me.
We get this whole really cool scene with the Mybi, Corlat, and Kaladin Brood, and they're talking about like Silver Fox and the nature of Silver Fox, and trying to understand with all these different personalities in there. And they want to know, like, why is she eating the Mybi? Why is she in such a hurry for growth? Is it so that she can like be all G'd up when the IMAS show up and therefore assert dominance over them? Is it because she's worried about a threat from Calor because of, you know, old stuff that's obviously bubbling under the surface, and therefore she wants to be all G'd up to be able to face down, you know, that threat? They don't really know what the motivation is, if it's even like a conscious malicious thing or not, but they do know, and they're kind of like Whiskey Jack and Dujek in the sense that they sense that Tattersail is the more kind of benevolent or whatever soul within that they want to try and help like rise to the fore. It's kind of like that John Cusack movie Identity, which, sorry if you haven't seen that, but spoilers, but you know, each one of those characters in that movie ends up being one of the personalities, and you know, it's like the goal is to get the John Cusack in the driver's seat, and so they're kind of in that same boat when it comes to Tattersail. And then before they all kind of roll out to the tent, we also get Corlat just admitting basically to the rest of the world that she is thirsting big time over Whiskey Jack. But then they all kind of roll outside, and it's one of the funniest scenes of the whole book, and Kruppe comes rolling in, and they totally mistake him for the like emissaries from Darujistan from the city council, and he's actually jacked their carriage from the town and rolls up before them, and then they come rolling up second, and it's like Cole and Marulio, because Cole's back on the council now, and he just starts like laying into Kruppe like no other, and all this comedy gold ensues. I love that scene. But what's crazy is like, after just a few seconds, like Kruppe immediately recognizes the Mybi, who's like been totally changed, and he immediately like connects the dots on all the stuff that's happening with Silver Fox kind of like devouring her life force, and all that feels super bad. We get the cool reunion from the Gadrobi Hills, right, with Ganos and Cole, and they're able to like throw back a few beers and kind of like catch up for old times' sake, and they're both like in incredibly different positions now. than they were when they had that like forged in the crucible kind of friendship that formed basically overnight, essentially. And that was really cool to see. The effed up part is that they have to use a wagon as their table, though, because the bridge burners obviously jacked the card table out of Kaladin Brood's command tent. But basically, the essence of this whole meeting with the Darujhistan Council, and the reason why Cole's there and Kruppe and everybody, is because they want to use Darujhistan, the wealth, the nobles, whatever, as the kind of like logistical arm of this newly formed alliance / army, right? And so that's what this meeting is about. That's what the negotiation is about. The problem is, of course, that these nobles are like greedy bastards, right? And so they're constantly like jockeying for position. It's going to be like a lucrative contract, right? And so they're all kind of like not wanting the other family to get a leg up on them. And so it's all this kind of BS political wrangling that is actually of no consequence to the broader goal. It's just all about kind of who's going to get the self-interested benefit of it. And that's when Kruppe totally steps in and dominates the scene. He proposes that you kind of get a neutral third party to do it. That way, that's something all these families will be able to agree to. What he proposes is that it's actually the Trigal Trade Guild, and that's kind of this obscure company. But if you remember back to Deadhouse Gates, the Trigal Trade Guild is the one that actually was going through all the warrens and doing the deliveries towards the end of Deadhouse Gates. So they brought that little like jar thing to Coltane and all the water and supplies for him. Then they made that stop over in Tremorlor and gave Fiddler all of his cussers back out of Darujhistan, if you remember that part. And so what is uncovered therein during that conversation is that Kruppe is actually turns out a shareholder, but he's like, bro, don't trip. He's like, it's all good. He's like, I assure you, any like conflict of interest is just pure appearance only. He's like, these are gonna be the dude, and ends up getting it.
Girlfriend's gonna get paid.
But then we get some confusing stuff. But Crone goes in while the bridge burners and Spindle is trying to do this reading, and she kind of like uncovers, she goes under the table and she sees this new card, which she describes as kind of like the glue that is holding this whole new deck together. But a lot of stuff is coming up in this reading, and it's hard to like put your finger on exactly what it all means. But they see the Knight of High House, Death. They see the Herald of Death. I think they saw the Magi of Shadow, the Assassin of Shadow, and they actually are able to connect the dots that is Callum. They actually also see all the kind of civil unrest and stuff that's brewing over in Seven Cities. And so actually, if you think about it timeline-wise, like all of the Seven Cities Deadhouse Gate stuff is actually happening contemporaneous now to what we're seeing happen on Genabacchus at this same exact moment in time. And Crone just kind of posted up under the table, listening to all this stuff, and she like looks up and realizes like, oh my god, those eyes are alive and looking around. Perrin then comes out and he hooks up with the Mybi, and they're like rolling through the camp because she's going to take him to where their table actually is. At that point in time, Crone comes rolling out. She's like all drunk off like proximity or something to this table, and all the bridge burners walk out and they're like, hey, oh dude, what a coincidence, perfect timing, we just found that table. And they try and totally like play it off, but Spindle is also like super effective because he recognizes that those eyes or that card is Ganos, because he's been doing the reading and like focused on this card the whole time. And so he totally trips out, like not as bad as Crone, but definitely he's like there, connected the dots, and ultimately they just get ordered to, take this table back and put it back in Kaladin Brood's command tent. You can't be jacking tables. Whiskey Jack debriefs Perrin about what his mission is, and their whole deal is that they're essentially deploying deploying out into the north to try and recruit the white-faced Barghast using Trots, who has like heritage back to that clan, as a way to get these folks into the game, and then they're all going to rally and meet up in Kapustan to try and liberate that city. Before it cuts away, we also find out randomly that Ganos now has like this weird telepathic link to his like pedo 11-year-old girlfriend.
It is weird, yeah.
Then we get, just more badass, and I'm grabbing my beer. This is like I'm channeling my inner Raph now, but Rake rolls up and does this killer, epic, badass scene, like cue Wolverine background explosion. He assembles from a dragon to a human, rolls into the camp, and is like, what up? Before anything can even really kick off, Calor jumps in immediately and jumps the gun and is like, yo, is it cool if we 86 Silver Fox? This has to go down. And Rake kind of immediately connects the dots, like, yo, they're looking for me to be like the adjudicator on whether Silver Fox lives or dies. And he's like, what side y'all on? Kaladin Brood's like, yo, we don't need you to assess the situation. He's like, because that's not going down. He's like, I'm siding with Silver Fox. And Corlad is like, yo, I'm siding with Silver Fox too, even though she's kind of Rake's second in command. There's a lot of tension and it's a great scene, but eventually Rake lets on that, like, yo, I'm kind of with Silver Fox too. You're kind of on your own, Calor, and he drops that classic line, "It was ever thus." But then like Whiskey Jack has this whole heroic moment, and he like rolls up and totally like squares off, like, what's going down here? And he totally isn't even aware that the situation has like already been defused. But then Rake quests out, and he's like trying to investigate Silver Fox with his magic, and he like engulfs her. And she straight up just slaps his hand away, slaps his magic away. And it was like an eye-popping moment. He immediately like grabs for Dragnipur. Kaladin Brood grabs for his hammer. Looks like is about to go down. Calor lines up next to Rake, and it's all like everybody's squaring off. Right at that moment, this table comes like flying out of the tent, and everybody kind of sees for the first time this new card of the deck. And the best part of all is who's dangling from the freaking leg of the table just grubbing on cookies? Your boy Kruppe.
I like to eat. Is that such a crime?
While all this is happening, Ganos is like outside the camp getting ready to bail, and he gets teleported into the middle of the camp where all this stuff is happening. He sees Kruppe dangling from the table. He sees himself hanging there, and, Quick Ben pretty much talks everybody down from the ledge, like, yo, whatever's going on, we don't need to be scrapping over Silver Fox in this kind of like Clash of the Titans type deal when there's something obviously a lot bigger and more gnarly going on right now, and is able to talk everybody down from the ledge. But all these chains are like wrapping around Ganos. He is getting like sucked in basically, and then he hits the ground, and all of a sudden all of his like pain is gone. But he wakes up and he's like not there anymore, and he's actually in this house of the Azath now. And it's actually the Finnest house with Race and Ralik Noms like passed out in the entryway. Race comes rolling up and is like, yo, I got more unexpected visitors. Ganos asks him what those, what Vorkin and Ralik Nom are doing laying there. He's like, I don't know, maybe those are like your servants now for you to be able to use. And Ganos is like, yo, look, I don't want this. But Race basically tells him the same thing that Silver Fox told him, which is like, brother, you don't have a choice. This is happening. This isn't a thing like you accept or not accept. It just is, and you got to deal with it. We get some of that like epic Jagged humor where he's like, well, what happens if I say no? And Race is like, well, I'll just kill you then. And Ganos totally doesn't get it that he's joking. But, those Jagged take the dry humor to another level. But what could be drier, I guess, than Frozen? So it makes sense. But basically, it all boils down to the fact that of what we already know, right? He tells Ganos that like a war has already started. That's why they need a master of the deck. That's why he's been picked, and the need is there even in the first place. He talks about how it's all connected, right? The regular war, the magical war, all these different layers are kind of all related. and of a piece, right? And so Ganos is like, all right, he kind of reconciles himself, steps into the shadowy, doorway or portal or whatever that Race brought him to, and he ends up on this concourse that we saw in Deadhouse Gates when Fiddler and them went into Tremorlore, and it's like this whole concourse with all the tiles, and we eventually see how Ganos' power actually works, because whatever tile he picks out, he focuses on it, looks at it, and he can actually transport, even though Race said he was only there like in spirit, he can use the deck to transport himself to these actual physical Warren location, realms, holds, what have you. Pretty badass view of what Ganos' power looks like.
Wow.
And he demonstrates this new power by first traveling into the Beast Hold, which is the old Warren hold, basically, that the IMAS used to use before they invoked this Talon ritual to wage endless war on the Jagged, which is a different piece, but he starts to realize what his power can actually do, and he starts looking at the card for Burn. He finds it and sees that her, her body, her skin, all that stuff is actually like the world, the rivers, the oceans, the forest, and that she's infected and has a cancer, and that this cancer is metastasizing, and he sees the source of the cancer, right? That this crippled god, this chained god, has been chained to her body, to the earth, and it's infecting her, and it's spreading, and in fact, he, it is kind of keyed into the catch-22, right? That you can't unchain it, because then it would be free to go out and wreak havoc and do all that, but you also can't leave it chained to Burn and be, infecting and poisoning the world, and that's where Kaladin Brood's at, right? That he can't, he's in this kind of impossible situation, and that Ganos kind of like realizes that that's the whole gambit, right? That the crippled god is betting that he'll infect Burn so bad that Kaladin Brood will have no choice but to free him to save his, he's charged with kind of being Burn's bodyguard. He beams back to kind of like the here and now and realizes like this whole thing is going to revolve around like who sits on the Beast Hold, and him and Silver Fox are involved in all this crazy stuff, but stuff basically de-escalates from there, and Quick Ben's like, yeah, don't worry about all the stuff at the table and everything. He's like, I'll take care of that. Rake gets super curious, but you get the Quick Ben like signature line, I value my privacy.
Don't you look at me like that.
Then we get this really sad scene, basically, where the Mybi is essentially trying to kill herself, and neither Crone nor Corlat will kind of let her go through with it. She really wants to. She's just, you can see that she's grappling and kind of losing the battle, frankly, between kind of like this love for the child on the one hand, and then the like resentment and bitterness for what the child is doing. And it's this whole great, thing about this as a book written by, an older, balder, whiter dude. Pretty epic, dope commentary on motherhood. I thought it was well done. But then we get this whole powwow between Rake and Kaladin Brood, and they talk about how they made a conscious decision back in the day to chain this crippled god to Burn, and that that he, if they free him to save Burn, then he's gonna infect all the other Warrens and use that to basically kill off all magic and really wreak havoc across the whole world. Or, if they leave him where he is, chained to Burn's body, he'll continue to infect her, and that will eventually end the world too. And so it's a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario where there's no real obvious solution, and Rake realizes that Kaladin Brood's just kind of like doing it so that he can buy these human mortals more, meaningless time on Earth, and which he thinks is stupid because he's like become so cynical in all of his years of life. But you see what a dope, that hits you in the feels. Poor Kaladin putting one down for the team.
That is so sweet.
They move on to talking about the Panty Domino and how basically the Crippled God or Chaos is at the root of all this stuff that's now currently going on. We find out a lot that Kaladin Brood is pretty scared about this prospect of having the Talon Imass enter the fray. You get Kalor talking trash as he always does, talking about how he's gonna F people up. Whiskey Jack totally like dismisses him, but he just keeps going. Quick Ben and Perrin are trying to like talk about his ascendancy and the master of the deck stuff and what all it means and figure that stuff out. Kalor just keeps going in, won't shut up, so Quick Ben just opens up a giant hole. Kalor disappears and they all just kind of dip out.
Bye, Felicia.
And the scene kind of closes out with Whiskey Jack, spilling the beans to Quick Ben, like, yo, look, I know something else is going on in the background. He's like, I'm not going to pry into your privacy and all that. He's like, but it's clear to me that you're doing all this stuff, like sacrificing goats and all this other gnarly stuff. Something's up. I'll leave you to your own thing, but I know something's up, dog. And again, just a classic piece of realization of just what a great commander and how keyed in Whiskey Jack is. That's why we all love him. So we'll leave the regular chapter stuff here. Leave now if you don't want to be spoiled, because I want to talk about a few things that this chapter opens up for the rest of this book and other books. Thanks so much for watching. A lot of good meat on the spoiler bone to talk about. One of the things I'm curious on guidance for is like, why did Rake and Envy and stuff, part ways once Triss ascended? What's the deal there? I thought it was cool because this like continues that theme of like these women who wanted to walk away from like unchecked violence, aggression, never-ending war, because you had like Kalava at the very beginning, like prologue stuff, right, where she goes and does everything she does to avoid going through the ritual to fight this never-ending war. And similarly with Envy, who didn't want to take place in this chaining, just like, leave it to the ladies to know what's up in terms of what's not going to be beneficial long term. What about that part when Kruppe tells Crone that she's a dog? And remember that part in Gardens of the Moon when he like disguises her as a dog and Kruppe pets her on the ears and stuff? Does this show like what a G? Is this an epic callback of Kruppe like remembering or knowing actually that was Crone the whole time and having pet her and all that stuff, or what? Someone also has to explain the obelisk part of that reading to me. Is it Talk? Because later in the books we talk about how Talk is of stone, or a few chapters later Tool talks about how he's of stone, and the obelisk of true sight, which he has obviously in his like missing eye and all that. Or what's your interpretation of obelisk and stone and true sight in this reading? I think this reading in particular is rich if somebody could dig into it. I love how Gonos thinks like, what kind of negotiation is Trot's gonna be able to pull off? And he's thinking like this is a diplomatic mission, not that Trot's is gonna go there and kick some ass and get everybody to follow that way. I love how he sees the twin thrones in the Beast Hold, right, which is kind of like a head nod to the end with Fanderay and Tog and the the whole plot that's going to play out there. And also just kind of like linking back and explaining that weird like wolf presence that we see in the prologue, which these newbies probably have no clue what's going on with that. But my biggest one that I want to know your opinion on is just like, what's the deal with this whole big standoff between Kaladin Brood and Anomander Rake? Is it just like posturing for the benefit of the group or the alliance, right? Because we know they're homies. He goes and like stands vigil and does all this stuff when Rake dies and builds the barrow and does all that. So it's like, were they ever really gonna scrap? What was this, like false tension? Or I'm curious. I'd love to hear your thoughts either here or in the Discord about just like, what's your interpretation of that whole thing where there really seemed like they were squaring off and had some serious beef potentially, where they might have killed each other, but then you get deeper into the books and you realize they were like about as tight as homies can probably get. So yeah, this is a dope chapter. The super long video, that's why I can only do one at a time, but there's just so much good stuff, so I'm gonna savor it. But I am gonna get back on track and try and get these out more quickly. So thank you so much for watching. Look forward to the comments, like, subscribe, comments, merch, Patreon, become a member of the channel, do all that stuff. But more than anything else, happy reading. See ya.